Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History, U.S. History Edition. So today's video is going to focus again on kind of guiding my students through kind of I would say a more challenging text. We're going to be looking at Andrew Carnegie's The Gospel of Wealth, which is an essay he wrote in 1889. And I'm going to guide them through this close reading strategy that we're going to use here in class. This is kind of just a video to kind of help supplement, talk through it a little bit, and guide them through the assignment. So what I'm going to have students do to start, before they even start reading, is I want them just to look at the title, Andrew Carnegie's The Gospel of Wealth. And I want them to ask themselves the question, what is this article going to be about? Now there's a couple of really key words that I want you to focus on. Gospel and wealth. What do you already know about those words? When you hear gospel, what comes to mind? What sort of images, what sort of words? Maybe you've come across this word in other aspects of your life. What do you know about it? Well, how is that going to sort of color your understanding of what this essay might write about? And then same thing with wealth. I think when we think of wealth, one of the first things we think of is money. And maybe what a person has. So maybe you want to build off of that. Second thing I want you to do before you even start reading is I want you to think about what questions do you have. As you think about that title, Gospel of Wealth, what do you think somebody who you already know was a very, very wealthy individual in this time period that we're studying? What do you already know about him? What would he be writing about with this idea of philanthropy? That's this idea that we're going to be coming back to. What should people do with their money? How should they give back? And what questions do you have about it before we get started? After you've thought about those, you've answered those two things, you've thought about your questions. Step 2 is where you're going to annotate. And I want you to kind of be looking for some specific things. Keywords or new words are sort of the first thing. Words that you think are important, and also maybe some words that you're not sure about, words that you haven't come across. Also, there's going to be a couple of really key aspects that I want you to be able to pull out today. And this is the purpose, and with that purpose, a little bit of point of view, but purpose, we're going to come back to that here afterwards, and then point of view. Knowing what you know about Andrew Carnegie or Carnegie, how does that perspective, being somebody of immense wealth in the time period, how does that affect the way you look at his writing here? So that's certainly his opinions and support there. Something you question, and honestly I would really like for my students, I'm going to give them this on paper, I would like to actually see them write a question. What's something in here where you would like to follow up with Carnegie, if you could, and ask him a more specific question, like, what do you mean? Or what does this look like? Or why don't you trust this? I think when we read, you'll kind of see what I mean by that last part. Pieces of the text that you find interesting. Maybe there's some lines in here that you really agree with. Maybe there's some ones you don't. And lastly, he's going to talk about what we call 3 modes when it comes to using wealth. I want you to think about which one do you agree with most. Because that's going to be a question that's going to get asked after we read. All right. I didn't give my students the whole text. It's a rather long text, and the section that I picked is already, it's fairly dense. There's a lot of information in here, and there's certainly some challenging phrasing. So as we look at this, again, we're looking from excerpts from Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie, his essay from 1889 called The Gospel of Wealth. We start then with the condition of affairs under which the best interests of the race are promoted. When he says the race, he's talking about the human race. But which inevitably gives wealth to the few. So again, that sort of large amount of money given to the few. I think he's sort of, even from his perspective of being somebody very wealthy, understands that divide between the rich and the poor. What is the proper mode? Here's where he's getting into. of administering wealth after the laws upon which civilization is founded have thrown it to the hands of the few. There are but three modes, and here's where his three come from, so I want you, as we get to it, think about which one you agree with, in which surplus wealth, surplus means more than what you need, can be disposed of, aka what you can do with it. It can be left to the families of the descendants, in other words, to your kids and your grandkids, or it can be bequeathed for public purpose, in other words, it can be given to the public to do with as they see. Or finally, the third one, it can be administered by its possessors during their lives. What that one means is that the ultra-wealthy get to decide what they want to do with their money. Now, he's going to argue later on that that money should be donated with a purpose, but he's going to argue maybe more specifically for the person who's made the money to make that decision. That's what that third one means. This then is held to be the duty of the man of wealth, to set an example of modest, unostentatious living. So again, living without extravagance, stunning displays of extravagance. Obviously, Carnegie and these titans of industry, or if you want to call them robber barons, they live with immense wealth. But he's saying maybe we don't need to live with the extravagance of the level that maybe we have. This is him reflecting as an older man, by the way. To provide moderately for the legitimate wants of those dependent upon him. He's talking about his kids and his grandkids at this point. And after doing so after you take care of them, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he is called upon to administer, and strictly bound as a matter of duty. So he's kind of even getting this, even in his word choice there, he's saying there's something that is required of you to administer in the matter in which his judgment, and administer means to give out, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. And what he means by this is using it to do the most good. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren, bring to their service his superior wisdom, experience, and ability to administer. This is where you hear a little bit of Carnegie's arrogance. He's kind of saying, hey, we know what to do best. We made this money. We know best what to do with it. Our poor brethren maybe can't make those decisions for themselves. This might be in a space where maybe you disagree with Carnegie. Doing for the better than they would or could do for themselves. Again, you hear that arrogance in his voice. That sort of, hey, we know better than you do. Let us tell you what you need. Maybe you don't agree with that. Thus is the problem of rich and poor to be solved. The laws of accumulation will be left free, the laws of distribution free. Individualism will continue, but the millionaire will be but the trustee for the poor. So in other words, he's the one who's going to be providing the funding to help the poor. Entrusted for a season with a great part of the increased wealth of the community. So again, bringing up the community as a whole. He talked about that duty towards doing the most good. That's what he's talking about, is bringing up the community itself. But administering it for the community far better than it could have done for itself. Again, another good example of maybe Carnegie's arrogance here, talking about how he could do a better job than maybe the community could for itself. The best minds will thus have reached a stage in the development of the race, again referring to the human race, in which it clearly seen that there is no mode of disposing of surplus wealth credible to thoughtful and earnest men into whose hands it flows, save by using it year by year, so over time, for the general good. So he's coming back to that third mode. Again, it's his, such as my opinion, is the true gospel concerning wealth, obedience to which is destined someday to solve the problem of the rich and the poor, and bring peace on earth among men goodwill. Carnegie again comes back to that third mode. He would rather see these millionaires decide where they think it makes the biggest difference in society towards helping their poorer brethren. And again, you hear a few examples in here of where he says that they can do a better job than the community can for itself. So again, maybe you don't agree with that. So now that you've finished reading it, here's where I want you to kind of dissect it a little bit. And here's where I want you to answer these questions, and I would like you to please do it in complete sentences. So take your time with this if you need to. First question is, what is the author's purpose in writing this essay? Why did Carnegie take the time to write this Gospel of Wealth? What was his goal? What is he trying to say about his fellow rich brethren and what their duty is, or what their purpose should be after they've taken care of their family and their grandkids and their needs to leave the world a better place and use that wealth for some good? So again, what does he say about what they should do and how they should do it? Again, give me some examples from the text that help support your answer. Secondly, Carnegie describes these three modes of distributing surplus funds. Which of these modes do you think the very wealthy people should follow? Why do you think? Maybe you agree more with the first one, with give it all to the kids. Maybe the second one, you think give it to the public, have them decide where the most need is. Or third, should they get to decide where they think it would make the biggest difference because it's their money? Whichever one you agree with, tell me which one you agree with the most. Tell me why. Thirdly, when you look at which mode of distributing funds would you follow if you were very wealthy? So in other words, if you were in Carnegie's shoes, which one are you going to look at? Also, consider his point of view on this, right? I think I might have skipped this one. My apologies for that. But when you look at he's a millionaire, today be a multi-billionaire, but how does that affect how he views this topic? Okay. And so when we talked about those examples, maybe of his arrogance, where does that show up? Okay. And then again with this one, I apologize if I skipped this one, but Carnegie believed in the responsibility of the upper class. I want you to finish that thought. How would you finish that sentence? And again, give me some examples from the text. I hope you found this helpful. Again, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of break this down. For those of you who maybe are just listening, I hope you found this interesting. Maybe gave you a chance to kind of revisit a really important figure in this Gilded Age, if you will. This time of immense wealth, certainly one of our titans of industry, or if you prefer the term robber baron, depends on your opinion. But certainly, I really hope that this helped break it down a little bit. And for my students, please ask any questions that you have on top of this. But I hope this breakdown helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History.